George, tell us what is, right? What is Monte Carlo simulation?
Right. Thanks for asking, Abraham. Essentially, imagine of Monte Carlo being a method of simulating a sufficiently large number of scenarios to talk meaningful variables on them. So I see a lot of people talking about Monte Carlo not being mean reverting, Monte Carlo not being assuming that there is no mean reversion. So first thing, Monte Carlo is the method of simulating a number of scenarios. The actual simulator that simulates those scenarios is a choice that we have to make. So we have to make the choice of what model will we use for the price process of the portfolio that I want to simulate. So currently in our software and in most of the softwares outside, they're using geometric Brownian motion. And which it is it's not a mean reverting model, but that doesn't mean that Monte Carlo is not mean reverting. I could go ahead and include a mean reversion level into my model and a mean reversion rate. Those processes do exist, and they're used, for example, in modeling interest rates.
So that's brilliant. So this goes right to the heart of questions that we get often asked in timeline, where people say things like, "Oh, the result of the historical data is different than the Monte Carlo simulation."
Thank God.
People,
Thank God that they're different.
Exactly.
Thank goodness.
Exactly. And I'm like, yes, it's meant to be different. It has to be different. I mean, it doesn't have to, but it has to be different, because if you think about it this way, within historical data, within the historical analysis, you're using pure historical path. And so if you think about, let's say we're using data from 1900, for instance, 120 years of capital market data, you're using discrete monthly data. And so that will give you roughly, if you're modeling 30-year scenarios, that will give you roughly 1,200 scenarios within that data set. Now, that's based on pure historical data. Then if you create Monte Carlo simulation, by definition, you're modeling scenarios that hypothetical scenario, right? That maybe hasn't occurred before.
There would be more extreme scenarios to those that historical simulation has.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons I don't expect the success rates to be of the same level. There would be differences.
Correct.
And that can be understood.
And of course, then people say things like, "Oh, your Monte Carlo simulation is different than another Monte Carlo simulation, another software."
Right. May I just say something about that? So some important fundamentals when somebody is using Monte Carlo analysis is make sure you're using, as I said before, a sufficiently large number of scenarios. If you're doing Monte Carlo analysis with 100 scenarios or 1,000 trajectories for your portfolio returns, be sure that the more scenarios you include, the variables that you're testing, like expected balance or success rate or any other metric that you think is useful, the value will start to stay the same as you add more and more scenarios.
So the improvement diminishes.
Correct.
As you go. So if you do 100 simulations, for instance, it wouldn't be enough.
It's a bad.
You say it's a crime,
baddest,
right? And then if you do 1,000 simulation, that's robust, but only to the extent that if you do 10,000, there shouldn't be a massive difference between 1,000 and 10,000. And then if you get to 100,000 simulation, so the incremental improvement diminishes.
That's correct.
And we tested this in timeline, and we do 1,000 simulations, but we found that if we did 10,000, there would be about 1% difference, 1% improvement, and so it's not worth that computer power,
correct,
to dedicate to this. Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about the strength and weaknesses then. I am of the view that Monte Carlo simulations, for the most part, cannot be as robust as historical data. And the reason behind that, for me, is historical data is the to my mind, the objective truth, right? It's the original thing, right? And so, and my, the view is that within historical data, we've got wide enough range of outcomes to worry about. We've got scenarios, market conditions that are based on, World War One, World War Two, the Great Depression, aggressive inflation of the 1960s and 70s. We've got the recent market condition, the tech bubble. We've got all of those, and so we can test the impact of a huge range of market conditions on our clients' retirement portfolio. And really, all we really have to worry about is the worst case scenarios, right? If we build a plan that survives the worst case scenarios using historical data, we're going to be fine. And so I don't see what you can get from running even worse scenarios than that. Then what do you do? The world will be, as I say, buggered. If we encounter scenarios that are worse than the historical worst case, and so that's one thing. But the real thing for me about simulated data, as in Monte Carlo simulation, is that it's this subjectivity that you talked about, that even within the Brownian motion framework, everyone still has, who construct a Monte Carlo model, they still have a degree of their own input and framework and judgment. And so for me, it just makes it really too, it can be doctored. I can create a Monte Carlo simulation for you to give you any result, anything I want. Okay. Right? So
thanks for this argument. I have to say, I love stochastic calculus. I studied stochastic
Hence why
calculus.
you had
I love
2
stochastic analysis.
degrees on this subject.
But to be fair, Monte Carlo is as good as 2 main assumptions. What inputs do we choose for the mean and the volatility?
Right.
And B,
and that's another question that we have to come back to. Yeah, cool, go on.
And B, what is the model am I using? If I'm using a geometric Brownian motion, then I assume that the prices follow a probability distribution which is called log normal. And that is because we want something that is not negative, right? You will not pay me £5 to get the share for free. So I'm using log normal distribution to model the price process. Okay. So two basic assumptions. What model am I using? What inputs do describe my situation? What is my estimate about the return and the volatility of the underlying asset classes of my portfolio?
Right.
Now,
right. And where do those inputs come from? The expected return. First of all, just because you expect a return doesn't mean the market has to deliver it. That's the first thing. But often, most people who plug in expected return data get the data from where? Where did they get it?
Historically.
From historical data. You might often it's less than they might use a 10-year data, and then they might make some adjustments based on, let's say market valuation or interest rate. But again, where does the knowledge of expected return come from, even if you're overlaying your own views about market valuation and interest rate? It's still based on behavioral relationship between asset classes. And so why not use the real thing?
You can do whatever you want, right? You can choose whatever.
Or you can ask God.
Exactly. That's my point. You can choose whatever values you want. You can use geometric mean, arithmetic mean. You can call God and say, God, what is the best inputs for my model? And God will say, oh, where are you invested? Oh, derivative contracts. Oh, you're an idiot. Bam. And you will close the phone. But truth is, the best evidence you have, the basis of everything, before you even start talking about stochastic simulation, is what happened already.
Right.
So I do perfectly agree with you that it should be used as the basis of your Monte Carlo projection. If now you want to include more factors and take into account current market conditions and future market conditions, based on your God relationship, you can do it. But I support using the past mean return and volatility as the basis of my Monte Carlo projection. That way I feel safe.
What does Monte Carlo safe? Yeah. What does Monte Carlo offer us though that historical data doesn't in the
Sure.
context of retirement planning?
Sure. A far wider range of possible scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do agree. You talked about historical, all the different events that happen, world wars, recessions, blah blah blah. I do agree, but
you want worse scenarios
there
than
is
that.
worse and far better.
Well,
actually.
far better. I don't care, right? Far better things are gonna be okay, right? It doesn't matter. You just what I mean.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. So you want worse scenarios than
Yes, it's
than the historical wars.
And one thing.
And what do you do?
One Monte Carlo is not predicting the future.
Right, exactly.
It's not
exactly.
predicting the future.
It's not.
It's a different point of different outcomes.
We're just
that then we talk about serious metrics on them. And one of the greatest for retirement is success rate. And you can apply success rate, as you said, in 800 rolling monthly historical scenarios, but you can also apply success rate on 10,000 simulated stochastic returns. And see what the impact would be of including more extreme scenarios.
Right. The important point though is that it still goes back to planning. In other words, even if I explore 10,000 scenarios, and let's say those scenarios are worse than historical market conditions, the fundamental point then still becomes, what do you do? And again, the question is, well, to what degree do we take this? To what degree do we take this just exploring scenarios? Even if you do 10,000 scenarios, I can imagine another scenario that would be even worse than that. The question is, what do you do with all these scenarios? At the end of the day, there's got to be a point that we decide, that we say enough is enough, that we draw the line and we say this is bad enough for us to worry about. And my argument is that anything that's worse than what we've seen within historical data in the last decade, in the last century, is not worth worrying about from a financial planning point of view. People say to me, well, what about World War III? And I say, well, in World War III type scenarios, everyone's plan will be buggered. And so
why would we care?
Well, why do we care? We'll be, so anyway, that's my thinking. I hope that's useful. So within timeline, the beauty is that I actually compare. We build this so that you can compare historical and Monte Carlo simulation. I am of the view that historical data is the most objective, most robust that you can think about. This gentleman disagrees with me, which is good. We have this debate all of the time.